Greetings, social psychologists. It's time to wrap up chapter 10. So this is part 2 of the lecture on chapter 10. We're mostly talking about what makes groups good and effective and what makes groups less effective. So the very first thing we need to talk about is outcome bias. And outcome bias, this can be a little confusing because outcome bias is the tendency to focus on outcomes when evaluating a group performance. But isn't that what groups are for? So, like, your team doesn't win the Super Bowl 2 years in a row. Do you fire the head coach? Um, isn't the team for winning the Super Bowl? But how many teams are there? I don't even know anymore. Um, but lots, and only one of them can win the Super Bowl, right? So is whether they make the playoffs and do well in the playoffs and get to the Super Bowl, is that the best criterion on whether to keep your general manager or your head coach or whoever it is, or are there other metrics that would be more effective? Um, isn't that the point of a football team, to win Super Bowls? But maybe the outcome is not always the point of the group. Maybe there's a ton of stuff going on that is outside the group's control, like what information they have access to. And based on the information that they have, are they using the best processes to make the best decisions so that on average, they're making better decisions than other kinds of groups? Um, Look, Einstein might not have been the smartest guy in history. I know this is hard to track because Einstein is doing space math and stuff that ordinary humans aren't even capable of. And he was right when all the other physicists of his era were wrong. So, was Einstein actually the smartest guy? Or were there people whose IQs would have measured just as highly as Einstein, making bad decisions about what's true about the nature of the universe? Intelligence doesn't necessarily lead to good decisions. Disciplined inquiry leads to good decisions, right? So I'm a scientist. What we're practicing here is science. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You don't have to have the highest IQ, the most capacity for thinking in abstractions to be the best scientist. You have to perform the disciplined inquiry. And disciplined inquiry is about following the steps. It's about changing your mind when you're demonstrably wrong about a thing. All right. So, really, really smart people can make really, really bad decisions because they're smart enough to talk themselves into falsehoods. Um, outcome bias in this perspective is a kind of hindsight bias, where we're valuing whether the person or the group was right or wrong about an individual thing, instead of did they do all the steps in the process in a way that on average is going to lead to the best decisions. Another note on biases in inquiry: a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about down the list is based on laboratory investigations. And in laboratories, people often have a lot more information and better quality information than they necessarily have in live, real life circumstances. So, with all of this in mind, let's proceed into what predicts better and worse group performance. All right. So, groups that are positively interdependent tend to make better decisions than groups that are negatively interdependent. And what on earth does that mean? Simply cooperative versus competitive. Cooperative groups were working together towards a common goal versus competitive groups, negatively independent groups, where two groups are working independently towards goals and trying to outdo each other in those goal attainments. Um, so we can talk about process gains versus process loss in decision making. We defined those in the last lecture. Process gains is when The group performs better than each individual member summed, and process loss is the opposite of that. You know what each group member is capable of, and we're operating below that summed level for some reasons. So in a positively interdependent group, a cooperative group, a process gain might come from people having more ideas. So you don't necessarily want to hire a bunch of people who look like you and talk like you and went to your fraternity in college and speak with your accent and grew up in your neighborhood, because people like you only have your ideas. Okay, you want outsiders. You want outsiders who have worked in different places and have different experiences and different career paths, and different values, because they're going to have different ideas than when you're pooling all your ideas. You have more ideas to choose from. Are they all good ideas? No, that's not the point. Um, but the idea you need right now might not look like a good idea to you. The more diversity you have, right, the more material for natural selection to operate on, the more material for process gains and decision making. Also, people might bring in unique information. And information's really important. Somebody might know a thing that nobody else knows. How do we get them to share that piece of unique information? Well, a cooperative group where we're all friendly and status isn't that big of a deal. We can elicit that individual bit of information from that individual person who knows something different. Enemies of this are going to be like status, where only one person gets to talk, and the junior members are afraid of appearing foolish, or high levels of group conformity, right? Remember Arthur Ashe, and a third of people will discount the reality that's right in front of their eyes. Um, Another process gain might be error checking. The more that we're friendly and on good terms, the stronger our relationship is, the more I can tell you you're wrong about a thing without there being much threat, much damage potential to the relationship. You, right? If we know each other and we're on good terms, you might go, "Oh, thanks, I was about to make a mistake there," instead of feeling threatened and getting competitive. Collective memory. The more people are in a room, the more the more chance that one person in the room remembers a thing that someone else has forgotten, and we can correct for forgetting. And we can create institutional memory and write things down and pass that forwards. And that's a tremendous value of cooperation. Transactive memory, that's where maybe I've forgotten something, but the more we talk about it, the more cues I get to the piece of information that I need, and that elicits that piece of information. Whereas if I were alone, just like racking my brains trying to come up with it, I couldn't quite get there. And the more people in a room, the more chance that we can cross cues and get that piece of information that we need. Okay. So that's a bunch of ways that we might get process gains in decision making in a positively interdependent or cooperative group. But we can get some process loss here too, right? It's not all sunshine and flowers, is it? We can get groupthink. Groupthink is when there's a strong social identity. We have a positive identity from group membership, and we think we are special. But this leads to high levels of conformity. I've only hired people who are like me. Maybe I'm a billionaire who's been randomly elected president for some reason, and I only hire other billionaires to do executive functions and be on boards and serve as team members. Well, now our collective group identity is we're the billionaires, we're the American intelligentsia, and we have all the good ideas, and we only believe that marginal tax rate cuts for billionaires are going to solve all the problems. And I get a lot of conformity. All right. The person on the team who's thinking, wait, maybe this is a problem that can't be solved with the usual means and methods. they're going to be really shy about proposing that idea, stepping outside, losing their standing in the group. So an example of this is like climate change denial. If you're in the libertarian group, maybe you have more or less good ideas about solving problems through politics, but that group believes that climate change is a communist hoax instituted by NASA to destroy the government that funds NASA. That's stupid. All evidence to the contrary, people believe this very strongly. It's down to about 26% of Americans from an all-time high of about 50% of Americans. But if you're in that political group and you're at the Libertarian Freedom Fest convention, everyone around you believes this thing. And if you are a naysayer, if you start explaining why it's irrational to believe climate change is a hoax, and we can see the evidence with our own eyes, and here's all the scientific data, and here's the 30 years of print journals, 30,000 articles all saying the same thing. People look at you like you're crazy. You lose your insider status in that group, get ejected, and that's not worth talking up over. So just like in the Arthur Ashe experiment, people will discount the evidence of their own senses because being a member of the in-group is more important. And then you get these weird conformity effects. Okay. How could we defend against this? Mindguards are the people who are there to make sure that we're giving voice to the minority opinion. So minority opinions have an ally. Remember, in the Ashe experiment, the percentage of people who discount the evidence of their own senses go down if one person ahead of them calls out the right answer instead of the wrong answer. Now we have a team. It's a minority team, but it's a team. We're not loners against everybody. So the idea of the court jester, the sort of medieval European, we have a court and it's strongly status dominated, and the monarch, usually the king, if they don't like your ideas, they can just call out, off with their heads. And so nobody's there to be a naysayer and go, that doesn't make sense under the circumstances. And I have this unique piece of information. If you had that, we might make a different decision. The court jester is there with complete freedom. All right, assaulting the court jester is treason. So the jester gets to say whatever they want to, and that could be crazy, stupid, funny, seditious. That's a really important function. It brings that status down a notch, and it gives air to ideas that otherwise might not get air. I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard of the idea of really high conformity in Japanese corporations where social status really matters and being in the in-group really matters. People would be really afraid to stand out and say unpopular things. So again, I've heard of it, but I haven't found the documentation that it's true. If it were true, this would be an example of the Mindguard, where the corporation hires an American who speaks Japanese to be the ugly American, and they're serving the function of the court jester. It's not expected that the Japanese people would stand up to the leadership and voice unpopular opinions, but the ugly American is there to just argue with everything that they hear and explain why everything is stupid. And that could create allies, and that could give voices to those unpopular opinions and prevent groupthink just the way that the court jester is there to do. Is it true? I'm not sure. If you have some evidence of that or against it, actually, I'd love to see it. Send me an email. Groups with a group with really high social identity thinks it's important and superior, and that leads to overconfidence. We can't make mistakes because we're the crazy billionaires club or the elites or the scientists, right? And we all look the same and talk the same and act the same. We have the best ideas. Diversity can help with that. So really high social cohesion tends to actually lead towards this conformity, because feeling good about the group membership is more important than being right. There's a problem with human beings that abstract notions of correctness, what's right in the abstract, is far less important than being in the in-group, historically, evolutionarily speaking. We're just at this time when being wrong about climate change has lethal consequences. Being wrong about COVID-19, lethal consequences. You can't just watch your insular news channel and listen to conspiracy theories. You have to learn to think. Yeah, that's the whole sentence, I guess. Um, Diversity can help. You'll have less group cohesion. You'll have less of that feeling of groupiness, right? We're all the same, but less of that pressure to do conformity, more of all this other stuff that's really helpful, right? More error checking and more the board is thinking, well, race isn't really a problem in America, and the person of color on the team goes, well, that's bullshit, right? Right, there you go. More of that collective memory, because we have more experiences and more unique ideas and more unique information that the group really needs. Diversity can help beat back the groupthink. Okay, you might get process loss from lack of information sharing. So maybe we are separated by geographic distance, and it's hard for me to tell you everything that I've learned out in my regional office in like a 15-minute meeting on the teleconference. Technology's helping, but it doesn't make things perfect. The more I run into you in the hallway, the more I can impulsively share what I've learned today, and that information can transmit through the organization. Okay, conversations can be dominated by the high status members. So we're at the board meeting and the president and the VPs do all the talking, and the lower level people who actually have the real information. Oh my God, the admin assistants know everything. They should be the people doing the majority of the talking, but high status members do most of the talking. And then low status members don't feel like their voice belongs in the space. It takes a lot of guts to speak up into a unified front. Yeah, so there's that. We tend to share information everybody already knows, because of the chances of being wrong when you say the thing that you know that nobody else seems to know. So that's more of that conformity pressure. Eliciting the unique information is a real skill, but you need that unique information. Brainstorming comes up here. I talked about that in the last lecture. Brainstorming's useless, so don't do that anymore. Okay. Group polarization. Conservatives conservatives and progressives have been drifting apart. In Even in the last 20 years, there was a lot more. Think of the ideas that people have and put those in a graph, and it kind of looks like this. And here's your progressives, and here's your conservatives, and there's a substantial area of overlap 20 years ago. But now you poll people in the political parties, and that they've diverged, right? They have almost nothing in common anymore. The more that we stay members of a group, the more extreme become our beliefs and our decision making. Gerrymandering has happened. If you're in a state like North Carolina, people are a little bit blue, actually. 52 to 56 maybe percent of people vote Democrat or Democratic, and a substantial minority, but a minority vote Republican. But 90% of their representatives in their state houses are Republican. And 75% of the representatives they send to the national Senate and Congress, the national houses, are Republican. So what does that mean? That means someone in a Republican district where Republicans are going to win the district, regardless of what people in the state really think, they don't have to be wary of challenges from the left. They only have to be wary of challenges from the right. So if they don't toe the party line and say whatever the party wants, no matter how stupid it is, like climate change is a hoax, then if they don't do that, they risk being primaried. That is, they can't be voted out in a general election. That's impossible. But they can be voted out in a primary election and replaced with the person who does believe whatever the party wants them to believe at the time. That's really bad because it's not that left or right have access to better ideas necessarily. It's that the more extreme those ideas are, the stupider they're going to be. Okay, so how do we make groups behave better? How do we get better on average performances out of groups? As usual, take all the stuff that we've been talking about in the first parts of the chapter and do the opposite. Okay, so first we need to account for our biases. The tendency for groups to believe that they are the best things in sliced bread. We need to get to humility without humiliation, right? That's always a theme of my classes. I want you to think about what you think. I want you to reassess your core values. Just because it's a core value doesn't mean you should believe it. You need to reassess it in the light of actual evidence. You need to know that it's going to take you a long time to do the assignments. Assignments should be getting harder the more that you go through school, and you should be getting more capable. The last minute syndrome. You should do things at the last minute. It's just that the last minute is sooner than you think it is, okay? The not invented here problem. People think that they have the monopoly on good ideas, and whatever they think of, they thought of first. So this is like your tendency not to cite and reference as much as you should on your papers. You had a thought, and you think that thought's original to you, but if you go through the literature, somebody probably had that idea first, and in academic practice, you have to attribute that idea to them, even if you never read their stuff before you had the idea. They had it first. Okay. This stuff is based on like availability heuristics. You're in your own thoughts in your room thinking things. And someone's paper they wrote in 1918, it's not on the top of your mind, it's not accessible to you, and so you don't think to make that attribution. Same thing in groups. We're here talking to each other, that's top of mind. It doesn't occur to me that other people could have good ideas too. Self-esteem needs. Go back to your cognitive dissonance. If you're a member of a group and they have stupid ideas, then you're kind of stupid to be a member of that group, aren't you? But you can't believe that. You're good and you're smart. So if you're in a political party that has increasingly stupid, retrograde, easily falsified ideas, it might be difficult to leave that political affiliation and jump tracks. It might be difficult for you to see that the emperor has no clothes, because that would mean that all along you were saying things that weren't true, right? That would make you pretty stupid. It doesn't. Smart people believe stupid things all the time. Remember that it's not intelligence, but process that leads to truth, okay? Disciplined inquiry leads to truth, and that means recognizing when things are wrong and changing your mind, okay? It's really that simple, not easy, but simple. So your self-esteem needs often, people's self-esteem needs often drive the belief that their group is the best group with the best ideas and the best processes and the most worthy, laudable members, all right, and so forth. Okay. Another way to improve performance, we account for the biases, and then we appeal to the individual self-interest of individual group members, right? So I want to fairly reward individual group performance. I don't want to assign team grades. I don't want to do that presentation assignment where 4 people are all getting the same grade, because I'm not rewarding your individual performance. I need to make it seem like, whether or not it's true, I need to make it seem like I can measure that individual performance. And then the individual feels accountable for their individual performance. That social loafing drops off, right? And I want to be careful about this because people are irrational. A danger is that everyone finds out what everyone else is making, and I'm giving out bonuses at the end of the year, and people are out there comparing their bonus checks. Why did you get 600? I only got 300. I work harder than you do, right? So we'll have upward and downward comparison. In upward comparison, we look at the people who made more and we try to work as hard as they work. Okay, but we also might do downward comparison. We look at the person who made more, and if we perceive they didn't work as hard, then we adjust our performance downward to match their performance. Okay, so kind of an example of this that shows up on the social media from time to time. You'll hear like the EMTs complaining, there's a move for fast food workers to make a $15 an hour minimum. Let's make the minimum wage $15 an hour. And then like the EMTs will go, wait, I make $15 an hour and I have some expertise, and I'm up to my elbows in blood all day. I work way harder than someone flipping burgers at McDonald's. You haven't flipped burgers at McDonald's. You don't know how hard and demeaning that work actually is. But you're doing this downward comparison where you think that fast food workers are inferior to EMTs because you're an EMT. That's the group that you're in, which must be superior to the group of people doing the fast food. And you don't think, wait a second, why am I only making $15 an hour? This one I've seen too many times. They're denigrating drug users. People hooked on heroin can get methadone because it's less harmful than heroin, and that helps us step down from heroin and get off drugs. And that solves a lot of social problems of crime and inequity, primarily in cities. So someone taking a medically necessary drug like insulin, why is my insulin $900 when these people are getting methadone for free, right? And the argument is we should stop giving out free methadone to solve a social problem. That's not the answer. The answer is that you live in a system that has medicine for profit. This is a distraction from the insurance companies getting rich off of you and from the pharmaceutical companies getting rich off of you. So you'll blame the people under you in society instead of the people over you in society. You need to look at the broad systemic issues and don't get distracted, people, okay? All right. So people are irrational, and you have to be careful about those appeals to self-interest. And people being careful about the appeals to self-interest are doing so not in the interests of the common person, but in the interest of the elite few making massive profits. So with care, all that stuff. Okay, we can improve communication, and especially unique idea sharing. We need to know what everybody knows, that special piece of information that one person has and is withholding. We need to get that out of them. One way to do that is subgroups. So in some of my classes, I'll show a video that's about systemic racism in the education system. And then I'll ask people, what do you think about that? But I'm asking 20 people. And each individual person is thinking, well, I don't want to come off as racist, right? Or the people of color in the room are like, I don't want to say this in front of a bunch of white people. I'll just get pushback. But if I break them up into groups of 3 or 4, it's much easier to risk giving your individual information to the 1 or 2 people who are around you. And then we can come back and report back the results of the group discussions. And that's far more effective, far more effective. Give people lots of time. If we're in a hurry, obviously we don't have time to elicit those bits of information. We don't have time to get comfortable enough with each other to feel like we can share our unique information or do those fact checks, those corrections along the way without damaging the relationship. Hire that devil's advocate. Get yourself a court jester. Get yourself the ugly American whose job is to contradict everything and cast doubt. And the group leader really matters. Whoever's leading the group needs to do a couple things. First, don't start off by offering your opinion because you're the high status individual and everyone's going to offer you stuff that supports your opinion, not contradicts it. You need to foster process. You need to come up with a way that we're going to elicit all the information, assign that to people, do the subgroup breakdowns, the subcommittees, and disrupt status, call on everybody. A high status person interrupts and talks over a low status person, and you go, wait a second, Derek, I want to hear what Susan had to say just there. And then listen to what Susan had to say. Don't let people override each other. Break up that status. Give the voice to the small people who you wouldn't otherwise hear. You're more likely to get that individual special information. And then we could do some getting out of the group leader thing back to the more general outside consultation. Because the tendency is for the way that we're doing things to become the group norm. The injunctive norms are the way it's always been done. And that might not be the best way to do the thing, right? There might be a better way to do it. So outside consultation comes in, and I guess plays devil's advocate a little bit, says, according to the data, if we do things thus and so, instead of this way, we get a little better performance. And then you have at least the option of changing your process to a better process. Goal setting matters. You probably know all about this by now. You have jobs and stuff. You want goals that are specific. And specific often means measurable. So not, we're going to improve productivity. Well, that sounds like a good goal, but how do you know that you've met it? How do you know that you're meeting it? How do you know what you need to do in order to meet it? We're going to improve productivity as evidenced by a 10% increase in acceptable completed pieces. Okay, that's specific and measurable. You want your goals to be difficult because maybe you meet the goals in the first week and then you just lounge around resting on your laurels the rest of the time. They need to be challenging, but they need to be attainable goals, not so challenging that it's impossible to do. At the psychiatric hospital, we have seclusion rooms, and people who are a danger to themselves or others in this immediate context can wind up being taken down and secluded. The hospital's overall goal is not to eliminate seclusions because they're medically necessary and necessary for safety reasons some of the time. But our goal might be to reduce them by 10% a year until they're at 10% of the original number. And that's a hard goal to meet because you're challenging institutional culture and trying to get people to use new strategies and tactics instead of relying on the old strategies and tactics. You get pushback from the workers, but it is an attainable goal. Okay. You can also call this the ZPD, zone of proximal development, where you're scaffolding your instruction and your support so that you're always a little bit ahead of what the team is really capable of, but they grow in their capabilities, and then when they're able to meet these goals, you move the scaffold out a little bit, right? So you should not be taking 400 level college classes. You're not really capable of reading and understanding the material performing to those standards yet, but you're capable of doing 200 level. And when you're done with this, you should be capable of 300 level. So you're always moving up, right? Okay. Diversity. Again, diversity for its own sake, it might make moral or ethical sense. That's not what I'm really here to judge today. Like the Americans like to believe that we have equal opportunity. We don't really have equal opportunity. Should we have equal opportunity? Personally, I would be firmly in the yes camp, but people need different kinds of motivations. And as a scientist, I can't also be a moralist. So diversity for its own sake might not be that appealing to throw into the social science mix. But in terms of decision making, diverse groups can have benefits and drawbacks in terms of making good decisions. And that's going to be the tension between group cohesion, that is people feeling like they're all the same on the same team, similarity, and the problems of group conformity. That is, if you have a really diverse group, it's harder to create that sense of groupiness. But because they don't have that sense of groupiness, they get less of the group think. So we're all coming together, we're having the big board meeting, and everyone looks different and comes from different places. And we have 3 major and 4 minor religions represented, as well as a few atheists and broad political spectrum. And all we have in common is we work at this place. It's hard to unify us. It's hard to get that common goal that gets us all together, working together. It's hard for us to trust one another. Gosh, I'm getting older and I forget whether I've told you stories before or not. Um, I like to go to unusual films for a person like me, and then think about them and analyze them, and incorporate that analysis into my writing. So when I was doing some journalism, I wrote for New Domain for a few years, and for them I went to the film Magic Mike XXL. And that was a really neat experience because I was literally the only male human in that theater watching the movie. In the dark, invisible to all the women watching the movie, I got to not only watch the film, which is spectacular, I also got to watch the women watching the film. And I got all these insights about what they thought was outrageous and what they thought was appropriate to laugh at, right? So in this age where sex and sexuality is freely available for anyone who cares to look, it seemed like they felt a lot of pressure to respond in a shocked fashion to things that might not be that shocking if they were alone, right? So the end of the movie, all the strippers are stripping and they get down to their like thong or something, and even the most minor sexual provocation, it prompted the appearance of blushing and embarrassment from the lady audience, that I think was largely because other ladies were present. Let me be clearer about this. I went to see I went to see Get Out, and the audience at Get Out was about half black and about half white. In this town where Black or African Americans are 3 to 5% maybe of the population, depending who you ask. Um, so the film is like a textbook on microaggressions. It's amazing. Jordan Peele is amazing. Such a great movie. One thing that it does is it uses racial tension, the anxiety that we feel about stereotype threat. It uses that to heighten the tension about the horror elements of the film. So you have a place, you don't want to attribute your feelings to the racial tension, and so you attribute them to the horror elements, which has you crapping your pants about stuff that objectively might not otherwise be that scary. It's so good. It's brilliant stuff. But there are jokes, right? And the white people in the audience know that they're in the room with black people in the audience. So when a racially formulated joke happens on the screen, the black people laugh, and then the white people, knowing that it's okay to laugh, also laugh. What's going on here? What's going on is black people see the movie with other black people, white people see the movie with other white people, and they don't know each other. So the white people don't know if they can get away with laughing at this joke. And so they don't have the relationship with the other members of the audience. They don't have this sense of groupiness, and lacking the relationship, they don't know how far they can trust the relationship with the other people in the room. All right. So when we're talking about diversity in a group, we're talking about getting people together, getting people to know each other so that we don't all have the same idea, but I know what you will be offended by, and you know what I will be offended by. And we have enough faith in each other that if I say something that's a little off color, the relationship is strong. And you can tell me, ooh, I thought that was a little off color, without me then feeling stereotype threat and then apologizing too much and then clamming up. We know each other. We're working on a common goal. The common goal is more important than our individual differences and feelings about those differences. So we're not creating sullenness or acting afraid to create sullenness and tension. That's this tension. We don't have the group cohesion. We can foster the group cohesion, but if we get too much of it, we get conformity. This is white people sitting around telling racist jokes. It's always inappropriate. Having some people of color in the team, though, right, it can break up that sense that we can get away with anything. It can curtail you. It can stop this drift towards more extreme opinions and more extreme decisions, and that separation between left and right over the last 20 years. So that's what I have to say about diversity in terms of process and process loss. Apologies if it's not as clear as it absolutely could be. And so we're done with, what is this, chapter 10 maybe? We're done with the part on groups, and that's it. Okay, bye.